the basic idea of microformats is putting human-readable data on the internet in a way that machines can also understand it. And so because of this, the idea is that you put the data inside HTML rather than in some alternative format. And the idea being that a human person reading the page can make sense of it, can see what's being expressed, but a computer that hits the same page can extract more information, can extract structure that helps inform the human-readable parts. So it's a sort of dual-purpose thing of making the web make more sense of the structure. So now, a user agent or a search engine parsing that will know that this URL is meant as a tag, and it's actually defining the last part of the URL here as being the tag. As displayed, this just looks like a presentation. It just So they just look like a normal link, but this piece of data is telling the computer that it's a tag. And we do similar things with other references. Another example would be what we call XFN, the XHTML Friends Network, to specify connections between people by using the rel attribute. So, for example, I could do a link to myself. Again, I've added a relationship saying that this is me, so for connecting multiple pages that are mine. I could link to somebody else. I could link to Mary by doing. It's the best page for Mary, but we can do natural maximization, I suppose. And there are a bunch of these attributes that have been defined to express common relationships. Friend, met, colleague. Notice they're space separated. It looks like dots because my editor is set to show spaces as dots, but those are actually spaces. And you can have an arbitrary number of these in the rel attribute to explain relationship. So this is a very, this is about the smallest thing you can do that's still a microformat. It's adding a rel thing. Now, if we wanted to add, actually say that this is a person that we're pointing to, we have another microformat which is called hcard, which is designed to express address cards. So if I wanted to add to my references to myself here, I could add a structure around this. So now I've made this a vcard. Sorry, vcard is the class for hcard. It's because it's based on the vcard standard, which is an IETF standard for expressing addresses. And then we could add classes on to express which parts of this are which. So we can say class equals fn for formatted name. We can also say class equals URL, because that the link URL in the link is also a representation of me. And we could actually say UID for unique ID, because that URL is a unique ID for me. So here you can see that I've now made what's called a vcard, which is an address card for me. I could add additional things to mark this up. So I could say span class equals given name, my first name, family name for my last name.
Okay, so Kevin, I have to be the usability person and dive in here for a second. So does everyone understand what this is, or is this just completely not making any sense? So no, yes, something?
It seems like a way of refining
The meaning instead
the
of
meanings
right.
using HTML, but also adding in different ways of differentiating with classes and things.
So the reason why we Kevin's explaining this, and I think what matters in terms of making a new microformat is sort of what you're doing is figuring out. I mean, Kevin was giving an example there of microformats that are already in use. But if we were to make a new one, then the goal would be to sort of backtrack, figure out what it is you want to express, what sort of meaning is there, figure out how to express it in a reasonable way in a microformat. And then I would say the last thing is that most people are not going to type out by hand all that stuff that Kevin just did. You don't want to ask users to do that. You actually want to take it another step and give them, say, a plugin to like WordPress or Movable Type or something, so that instead of them having to type in and remember off the top of their heads all those little pieces of syntax and microformat, instead you just say, if you're referring to yourself, do you want to refer to yourself? What's your link? And they just type in the link, kevinmarks.com, and all that stuff gets built behind. But then when it goes out through an RSS feed or shows up underneath the blog post or whatever it is that they're publishing, the code is there, and search engines can come along and spider or grab that RSS feed and make more sense of it than if it wasn't there. And so a lot of interesting things can then happen. So there's a human readable layer, a machine readable layer, and then, I mean, I think in the context of a search instance, a search company could take that information and translate it to XML and make it have meaning for them sort of in the background. But it means that really anybody can take the most basic piece of meaning here and do something with it. Because and I would say the other reason that microformats was developed around HTML is because one of the basic ideas is that you do things in very simple ways. Instead of trying to come up with an all-encompassing format that covers every single possibility forever and ever and ever, which equals giant standards body that never gets anything done and it takes years to do, that instead you come up, you figure out one small thing that you want to do, you figure out how people are already doing it out on the web, and the way people are already doing some things right now is around HTML, so why not give that a little bit of structure and meaning and make it simple, give people a plugin to publish it, and you're done. So that was the logic.
Right. XML is deliberately designed so that everyone can make up their own stuff. It's just a generic way of creating structure. And there isn't a natural way to converge that. Basically, you end up having to go around convincing everyone to converge on it. You have arguments over namespaces over which attributes you use for what. And it also has a bunch of ambiguity about should something be an attribute or should it be a contained element. And there's a whole bunch of decisions you have to make, and everyone will make them differently, and everyone ends up making up different names for the same thing. So the address thing is an example. I will bet you that anyone who's made up an XML format for an address has come up with something that's probably approximately the same, but actually has different names for everything. And you probably done it yourself if you've done any web development. You make up a name for name and surname and zip code, and then suddenly you baked in US dependency on it, as opposed to using these standard forms that have come out of the ones that I was using for HCard have actually come out of the vCard standard, which they spent a long time arguing about to make sure they would work in Europe and in Japan and China, which is why it's family name and given name, not first name and last name, because first and last are ambiguous in those cases. So there's examples like that. So the point is, and it's deliberately not namespaced to force people to use the same one, to converge on it. So say, okay, we've got a good concept here of given name, we should use that everywhere we need to give a given name. Or the other example is FN for formatted name. That's a very useful concept to use. We should reapply that to lots of places.
So I mean, there's vCard and iCal standards which exist, and it's great that you can sort of use what they've already come up with and use them here. But what about things other than people and events? When you need to create other microformats, where do you get that from?
Okay, that's a nice lead-in. So, hopefully the page will have loaded by now. So, we started out doing this with, basically the goal of microformats is not to encode everything. You can already arbitrarily encode everything you want. The goal is to find things that are shared things that people want to interchange, that are already in use, and then converge the ways people are marking those up. So, the reasons we tackled cards, people, places, and events first is because if you look around at the web, there's lots of those about.
You have one for places?
Yeah, an H card can be used for a place as well.
Oh, okay.
You can use it for, it's got an address in it, so you can put I didn't do that full demo. I mean, this damn thing will load, and I can show you the creator, which gives you a bit more example. No, okay, never mind.
People, places, and what was the third?
Events. Right. So those are off the top of my head, those are things. There's also reviews and a bunch of other things that we picked out. There are lots of, but those were the two that we found that almost every web application has those in it. Almost all of them has people in. A lot of them have events in. And places is a sort of the V card is an address card, so it can express place as well as a person, depending on what you put in it.
When you talk about reviews, do you mean like reviews of a restaurant or reviews of a product? I mean, because they're very different.
Right. Reviews of we looked at it and we found that there are some common elements for reviews that they all have. They have the element they're reviewing, they have a rating, they have an author of the review, they have some commentary, and they may have some tags or categories that they're reviewing it under.
So you lose things that are specific to different kinds of reviews when you do this?
To some extent,
okay.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is that the microformats are composable. You can use one inside the other. So, for example, when you do an event, you use the student H card to do the location.
Oh, okay.
So if you're reviewing a restaurant, you can use an H card to specify the restaurant. To not try and define everything for all time, but to define reusable elements and to solve the simplest problem you can.
Something that publishers want to use that any blogger, any publisher wants to create so that it works for the community. And so I'm a little bit hesitant to just say, here, do it this way, because that would be ridiculous.
Right. And the way we decide that is we look at examples in the wild already. So we go out and see how people are marking up their media today and see what elements they're using and what's common. And then from that, we try and derive a schema to say, is everyone using author? Is author something that matters to them or not? Is a link to the media always there, or are people talking about things they're not linking to? And look at how people are actually presenting it, and then use that to derive the schema. And then we go back and say, okay, now we have a schema expressing what people are using. Now let's see what we've already got that will fit these pieces that we can reuse. And if there's anything left over, we define something new. So, for example, if we have an author, we will use an H card for that, because H card is a way of expressing a person.
How about wikis? Did you already talk about that? Are there plugins so MediaWiki will now be able to say this is a person I just mentioned, or this is a...
There are people working on that. There is work on adding geo markup, the geo microformat, which is a subset of the H card, an element of the H card, to MediaWiki, and that's ongoing, and people are working on doing this in other places. Yeah. The goal here is very much getting people to converge on using the same terms for the same things, and not forking off into their own stuff. But we keep saying there's an 80-20 rule. We say basically it's only worth doing if 80% of the examples have this. Otherwise, we're going to spend all our time in the rat holes in the corner. So let's standardize those first and then revisit them later if we suddenly find we've missed something important that lots of people have used, or something new comes up and we say, oh, it would be really good if we added that feature. Then that comes along later.
I think if you look at what most people are doing, it's going to be in like a Flash player, which has things like being able to tag, comment, and it's within a custom format that different companies have that they're implementing.
Right.
If you want to look at what's happening,
that's very common in media.
Implemented.
Yeah. So one of the issues with media at the moment is you have stuff inside Flash, you have stuff inside MP3 tags, you have stuff inside QuickTime metadata. There's a whole bunch of different stuff that's inside the media. But the thinking of having a media microformat would be to have that representation by the media in HTML. Now, the example of this, the key example of this at the moment is podcasts. If you look at podcasts, they have a bunch of HTML markup with each piece of media, and then there's some stuff that they will express there as like about what they're talking about. You know, is the title of the piece of music, if it's music, people speaking, what they're talking about, that kind of stuff. So looking at how people are already doing this on the web with HTML. So what we find is that the sort of podcast is a nice way of wrapping up little bits of HTML and a piece of media, and another little piece of HTML and a piece of media, and so on. And then we publish a new one, it goes to the top, the other ones move down. So you've got this nice model of a little bit of HTML with some media attached, but the people can already read the HTML, it's designed for them. The question is which of those attributes need specific markup, because they're shared among lots of them, and which of them would be, you know, for one certain podcast, a certain kind of author. Information that represents a media element that's attached to a web page. And then go through and find examples of this and see what people are, you know, connecting, already using, and gather that information up and look to see what's already there, to see what they have in common, and try and find the overlap there. So this is an example of, this is like the audio info one, and a list of things there. And then from that we say, okay, where do we go from that? How do we just derive a schema? So we look at the things they've got, and then there's a draft of this, which this draft was just put together last week, and I'm not sure how much reviewing it's been through yet. So
of the audio.
Yeah.
This is the draft audio. Piece that's basically been proposed after figuring out some examples that have common elements. So you say, okay, titles usually exist, and therefore the proposal has title.
In practice, actually, we probably wouldn't use title, because we've already used that to mean job title in HCard. So we'd have to use something else that expresses the title. One example would be formatted name, the FN field that we've used for names of things elsewhere. So the goal is to always reuse the existing labels that we've used for the same kind of thing. So here, the guy who wrote this is a proposed title. We push back on that and say, don't use title, that means something else. Particularly when you've got V-cards around, title means job title. And then, so here he's found there's an artist, he's decided that collaborator is a good name for that. That's an arbitrary choice, and that was something we debated, come up with a clean term to express what's meant by that. Collaborator may not be the right, it could be contributor, it could be author, but that gets tricky if you have multiple authors with different roles. So thinking about the right term for that is like the next piece of driving the schema. And you have examples with more complexity where you may need to express different kinds of roles. So it may make sense to keep this piece simple and keep the variety in the role over here, and not base that on not legislate that too much. And it's through discussing in the wiki, on the mailing list, and in IRC, and potentially in face-to-face meetings, and make sure that we end up something that people can agree on. And like a lot of wiki-based editing, if you can't agree on it, it ends up being left out. We say, okay, we can't agree that we should have a data rate term, so we'll leave it out. Or we can't agree on the meaning of something. Clearly, it's not an 80% overlap. That piece should be missing. We just specify the pieces that we can agree on. And so, the goal is always converge on what you can converge, share the meaning, and omit the corner cases, because they're obviously not stable enough to have agreement yet. Because one of the points is with these are HTML classes. You could always add your own ones to it as well. There's nothing. You can go out now and put class equals title on something if you want, but that will confuse someone who's looking for if that ends up inside an H card, that'll confuse someone. They'll think the person's job title is I have a dream. So you can do that. It may not be sensible, but if there's some term that we've left out that you wanted to add, you could always add that to your own site. Encourage people to pick it up that way, and that way it feeds back into the next round of gathering examples of what people are already doing. So the point is that this isn't really legislative. This is summative of what people are doing, and then trying to converge that rather than encourage diverge. You can diverge in your own sites, but we try and converge in usage in this way. So it's a tricky process, and I really recommend you read the process page on microformats.org if you're interested in this, because we ended up at that after doing some of these and documenting what we were doing, but also a lot of it is to protect us from ourselves. Because if you're a programmer, what you want to do to start with is come up with a nice clear data structure and use that and not actually think about anything else and code it first. So that's why the rule says first don't write anything down, go and see what people are already doing, and only when you've got some agreement on from that do you make stuff up. Because there's a natural tendency to sort of go off and say, oh, well, what about this and what about that? And I'm sure I understand addresses because I've got an address. Do that kind of data design and then come back and then try and convince everyone else to use the same one you've got. So the goal is to find what other people are doing first, converge that, and then document the shared pieces.
So that's the consensus building part, has to be about the names, right? But you don't start with looking for examples of the names on the web. You look for examples of the data on the web, right? And you bottom up like that. And that process is how ontologies are designed as well when they're done that way, for interoperability. So that makes a lot of sense. Now the interesting thing here is if you're composable, in theory, you ought to be able to have not have to have a stable set of primitives at some point.
Exactly.
And encourage not too many more. Right?
That's very much the thought. So that's one of the reasons that the media info microformat has been sitting here for a while, is that we've been trying to stabilize that and not start making up things out of whole cloth again. So very much reusing HCard for the people elements and so on.
I had a question as well. Google-based. Google-based is an experiment in actually voting for the names of fields, in a way. So they say, well, here's a couple of recommended ones, but if your data schema calls it address and your calls it title, whatever, fine, just upload your data, and the histogram of whose fields are used the most will sort of win some kind of a race. I don't know who judges the race and what.
Well, that's the issue. The question is who judges the race.
Yeah.
Can you see it?
Yeah. Are you ready to have any influence on Google-based, or do you have any, since you're now there, anything to say about that?
I'm still finding my way around inside Google, finding where all the different pieces are. So yeah, I'm going to go and talk to them at some point and look at that. The thing that is interesting about G-Data is that it's moving to Atom Publishing Protocol, which means that it's got this way of generating and pushing stuff around, but something that actually has an HTML basis as well. So I think that there's some potential there, but I don't know, I haven't tracked those guys down and given them a microformat spiel yet.
So you could put that in like the XHTML section of an Atom feed?
Sure.
Put all the stuff, that's how you would do it?
That'd be a very good way of doing it. I mean, the nice things about Atom and RSS is that they're really good ways of moving little bits of HTML around. And the HTML tends to get preserved through transformations, whereas the other fields will get eaten and destroyed and manipulated. So the HTML sort of goes everywhere. So, I mean, people have said RSS is like a pipe. It's not like a pipe. It's more like tar. You've got a bunch of little chunks of stuff that are wrapped up together, and then you can pull them out and treat them individually. And the nice thing about HTML is that it tends to get preserved through all these transformations and come through. So you can even email it to people, and it'll come through most of the time. So there's a niceness about that, and it also means that you don't have to go through okay, I'm going to find another extension to Atom and get this into Atom and then go and argue with the Atom dev list, which, I don't know if you've done that, but it's kind of fun.
To what extent is microformat information used in most existing search engines, and how do you see search engine technology in general evolving with the wiki principles and tagging?
So the question was, how is microformats used in existing search engines, and how do we see that evolving? What we're seeing is adoption by publishers first. So people who are publishing the data, and this is very much by design. We made these microformats very easy to publish. For example, Brian Deere of event database EVDB said he added microformats to his database in about 4 hours by changing the templates. So suddenly all his events were marked up with microformats. So that means he's got a source of events marked up as microformats. Upcoming.org is a source of events marked up as microformats. Suddenly it becomes a lot easier to make sense of events on the web.
Is Upcoming using HCal?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's using HCal and HCard. Each page
and it's a lot. Actually, I was IMing with Brian the other day, and he said that they had over 10 million events. So that's a lot of use.
Yeah, that's a bunch of data that's now a lot easier to make sense of. So were I writing an event search engine, which I've done a little bit of before at Technorati, but you can just go and look at those and get those events directly without having to write a special parser for each site. You can pick them up from EVDB, from Upcoming, or from my blog, or from wherever they are, because they're in a common format, which makes the process of doing that a lot easier.
And they're human readable.
So yeah, it's in they're human readable as well, but also they're manipulable in place. So you can have a little JavaScript widget in your browser that will take that event and put it into your calendar directly. So the nice thing is they have these sort of multiple uses. They're useful to the search engines, but they're also useful just to the individual user of the site because they can then add it to their calendar very quickly. So that, there are other ways of doing that, but it tends to involve generating a separate file, putting it on the server as well, and adding a special link to that, and then hoping it downloads correctly.